My name is Evelyn Barnes. I'm 27 years old, and at my own wedding reception in front of 200 guests, including my colleagues, friends, and extended family, my parents, Gerald and Dorothy Barnes, took the microphone during the traditional gift presentation and announced they were keeping my $850,000 dowry for safekeeping because I was too young and impulsive to handle this much money responsibly, publicly humiliating me at what should have been the happiest moment of my life. What they didn't know was that I had been secretly working with a forensic accountant for months after discovering suspicious irregularities in the dowry fund statements, and their theft of my grandfather's legacy was about to trigger legal consequences that would destroy their reputation, their finances, and their social standing in ways they never could have imagined possible. I've spent the last 5 years building my career as a senior marketing executive at Pinnacle Advertising in Manhattan, managing multi-million-dollar campaigns for Fortune 500 companies, while earning a 6-figure salary that had made me completely financially independent and professionally respected in one of the most competitive industries in the world. My success wasn't accidental or inherited. It was the result of graduating summa cum laude from Columbia Business School, working 18-hour days during my early career, and developing the strategic thinking and creative vision that had made me the youngest senior executive in my company's history. But beyond my professional achievements, I had always known that my financial security was anchored by the substantial dowry that my beloved grandfather Harrison Barnes had established specifically for my wedding day, a family tradition that stretched back 3 generations and represented not just money, but also his deep love for me and his commitment to ensuring that I would start my married life with the financial foundation necessary to build whatever dreams my husband and I chose to pursue. Together, the dowry fund had been established when I was born, with my grandfather contributing $200,000 from his successful real estate development business, along with detailed investment instructions designed to grow the money steadily over the decades until it reached substantial value by my wedding day. Harrison Barnes had been a brilliant businessman who had built a commercial real estate empire throughout the Northeast, and he understood the importance of long-term financial planning and the power of compound interest to create generational wealth that would benefit his family for years to come. "Evelyn, sweetheart," Grandfather Harrison had told me during countless conversations throughout my childhood and teenage years, "this dowry isn't just money, it's freedom. It's the ability to make choices based on what you want rather than what you need. When you get married, you'll have the financial security to buy a home, start a business, travel the world, or do whatever makes you and your husband happy, without worrying about money or depending on anyone else for support." The dowry tradition in the Barnes family wasn't about outdated gender roles or treating women as property. It was about empowerment and independence, giving daughters the financial resources to pursue their dreams and build strong marriages based on love and partnership rather than economic necessity or dependence. Harrison had done the same for his other granddaughters, and each had used their dowry to create successful lives and strong families that honored the legacy he had worked so hard to build. The fund had been managed by a professional investment firm throughout my childhood, with regular statements showing steady growth that had transformed the original $200,000 into what was projected to be approximately $850,000 by the time I reached marriage age. The growth had been consistent and impressive, reflecting both the wisdom of Harrison's initial investment strategy and the careful professional management that had guided the fund through various economic cycles and market conditions over the past 27 years. When I turned 21, management of the dowry fund had been transferred from the professional investment firm to my parents, Gerald and Dorothy Barnes, who had requested the authority to oversee the final years of growth leading up to my eventual wedding day. At the time, the transfer had seemed reasonable and appropriate, since my parents were successful professionals themselves. Gerald owned a chain of luxury car dealerships throughout Connecticut, while Dorothy was a prominent interior designer whose clients included celebrities and wealthy business executives. "We want to be more involved in managing your dowry fund," Gerald had explained when he requested the transfer of authority from the investment firm to their personal oversight. "Your mother and I have experience with financial planning and investment management, and we think we can achieve better returns by taking a more hands-on approach to growing the fund during these final years before your wedding." Dorothy had been equally enthusiastic about taking control of the dowry management, presenting detailed plans for investment strategies that she claimed would maximize the fund's growth while protecting it from market volatility and economic uncertainty that might threaten its value during the crucial years leading up to my marriage. "Evelyn, darling," Dorothy had said, "your father and I love you more than anyone else in the world, and we want to make sure your dowry is as large as possible when you get married. We've been researching investment opportunities and financial strategies that could potentially increase the fund's value beyond what a traditional investment firm might achieve through conservative management." The explanation had been convincing, and the family connection had felt meaningful, so I had agreed to the transfer of authority while maintaining the understanding that the dowry would be presented to me on my wedding day, according to the family tradition that Harrison had established, and that had been honored for previous generations of Barnes women. For the first few years after the transfer, Gerald and Dorothy had provided regular updates about the fund's performance, showing statements that indicated continued growth and successful investment returns that were meeting or exceeding the projections from the original professional management. The reports were detailed and impressive, suggesting that their hands-on approach was indeed achieving better results than the conservative strategies employed by the previous investment firm. "Your dowry fund is performing beautifully," Gerald would report during our monthly family dinners. "We've been able to achieve returns that are significantly better than what you were getting from the investment firm, and we're on track to present you with well over $850,000 when you get married." Dorothy would supplement these reports with explanations of the specific investment strategies they were employing, describing stock purchases, bond investments, and real estate transactions that were apparently generating the superior returns they were claiming to achieve through their personal management of my dowry fund. "We've been diversifying the investments across multiple asset classes," Dorothy would explain, "including some real estate opportunities that your father identified through his business connections, and some stock investments that I researched through my clients who work in finance. The combination is creating a balanced portfolio that's growing faster than traditional mutual funds or conservative investment approaches." Have you ever trusted family members with something precious to you, only to discover years later that your trust was being systematically violated while they maintained an elaborate facade of responsible stewardship? That's exactly what was happening with my dowry fund, though I wouldn't discover the truth until the most humiliating moment possible during what should have been the happiest day of my life. The deception was so complete and professionally presented that I never questioned the legitimacy of the reports and statements that Gerald and Dorothy provided during their 6 years of managing my dowry fund. The investment returns they claimed to be achieving were impressive, but not unrealistic, and their detailed explanations of investment strategies sounded knowledgeable and sophisticated enough to justify the superior performance they were reporting. But as my engagement to Marcus Chen approached and we began making serious plans for our wedding, I started asking more specific questions about the dowry fund and requesting more detailed financial information that would help us plan our post-wedding financial goals and investment strategies as a married couple. Marcus and I had met 3 years earlier at a professional networking event, where his work as a corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions had immediately impressed me with his intelligence, integrity, and commitment to excellence that matched my own professional standards and personal values. Our relationship had developed slowly and thoughtfully, built on mutual respect, shared ambitions, and genuine compatibility that made us both confident that marriage would strengthen rather than complicate our individual successes and future goals. "I want to make sure we handle your dowry responsibly," Marcus had said as we began planning our financial future together. "That's a significant amount of money that could fund a house down payment, business investments, or long-term savings that will benefit us for decades. We should meet with a financial advisor to develop a comprehensive plan for integrating the dowry into our overall wealth management strategy." Marcus's practical approach to financial planning was one of the many qualities that had attracted me to him, and his suggestion that we develop a professional strategy for managing the dowry money demonstrated the kind of thoughtful partnership that I wanted in marriage. But when I asked Gerald and Dorothy for the detailed financial statements and investment documentation that would be necessary for professional financial planning, their responses became evasive and defensive in ways that should have raised immediate red flags about the true status of my dowry fund. "Evelyn, you don't need to worry about the technical details of the investment management," Gerald had said when I requested comprehensive statements and documentation for our financial planning meeting. Your mother and I are handling everything professionally, and the money will be available when you need it. There's no reason to complicate things with additional financial advisors or detailed analysis of investment strategies that are already working perfectly. Dorothy had been even more dismissive of my requests for detailed financial information, suggesting that my desire to understand the fund's management was evidence of distrust that was hurtful and inappropriate given their years of successful stewardship. "Evelyn, I'm hurt that you would question our management of your dowry fund," Dorothy had said, her voice filled with the wounded tone she used whenever anyone challenged her authority or decisions. "Your father and I have been working tirelessly to maximize your inheritance, and we've achieved results that far exceed what any professional investment firm could have accomplished. Your lack of appreciation and your demands for detailed documentation suggest that you don't trust us to continue managing your financial interests appropriately." The guilt-based responses to my reasonable requests for financial transparency were manipulative and concerning, but they were also effective in making me feel uncomfortable about pursuing additional information or independent verification of the fund's status and performance. However, as the wedding date approached and the dowry presentation became an immediate, practical necessity rather than a distant future consideration, I became more insistent about obtaining the specific financial information that would be required for the traditional ceremony and the subsequent transfer of the funds to my personal accounts. "Mom, Dad," I had said during a family dinner 6 months before the wedding, "I need you to prepare the dowry fund for presentation at the wedding reception. According to family tradition, the money should be presented during the gift ceremony, and I'll need the funds transferred to accounts that Marcus and I can access as a married couple for our house down payment and other financial goals." The request was straightforward and entirely consistent with the family tradition that had been established by Harrison and honored for previous generations. But Gerald and Dorothy's response revealed the first clear indication that something was seriously wrong with their management of my dowry fund. "Evelyn, we've been thinking about the dowry presentation," Gerald had said, his voice carefully controlled in a way that suggested he had rehearsed this conversation. "And we're concerned that presenting you with such a large amount of money immediately after your wedding might not be the best approach for your long-term financial security and responsible money management." Dorothy had quickly joined in with supporting arguments that were clearly designed to justify a decision they had already made without consulting me or considering my wishes about my own inheritance. "Darling, your father and I have been observing how you and Marcus handle money, and we're worried that you might make impulsive decisions with the dowry funds that could jeopardize your financial future," Dorothy had said, her condescending tone making it clear that she viewed me as incapable of managing my own financial affairs despite my successful career and demonstrated financial responsibility. "We think it would be better if we continued managing the dowry fund for a few more years while you and Marcus establish yourselves as a married couple and prove that you can make responsible financial decisions with smaller amounts of money," Gerald had continued, apparently believing that this paternalistic approach was reasonable rather than a complete violation of the family tradition and legal obligations surrounding my inheritance. The suggestion that they should continue controlling my dowry fund indefinitely, based on their assessment of my financial maturity and decision-making capabilities, was so insulting and inappropriate that I initially couldn't respond. They were treating me like a child who needed parental oversight of my financial affairs, despite the fact that I was a successful professional who had been managing my own finances responsibly for years. But more troubling than their condescending attitude was the realization that they were planning to violate the explicit terms of Harrison's dowry arrangement and the family tradition that had been established specifically to ensure that daughters received their inheritance on their wedding day, rather than being subject to ongoing parental control and approval. "This isn't about what you think is best for my financial future," I had replied, finally finding my voice despite the shock of their announcement. "This is about honoring Grandfather Harrison's wishes and following the family tradition that he established. The dowry is supposed to be presented at my wedding, and it's not your decision to change that arrangement based on your assessment of my financial capabilities." But Gerald and Dorothy were unmoved by my arguments about family tradition and Harrison's original intentions, apparently convinced that their parental authority superseded both legal obligations and established family customs. "Evelyn, Your grandfather couldn't have anticipated the economic uncertainty and financial challenges that young couples face today, Gerald had said, dismissing Harrison's carefully planned legacy as outdated and irrelevant to current circumstances. We're making a responsible decision based on current conditions and our assessment of what's best for your long-term financial security. The conversation had ended with Gerald and Dorothy maintaining their position that they would continue controlling my dowry fund despite my objections and their legal obligation to present the money at my wedding according to Harrison's original plan and the family tradition that had been honored for previous generations. As I left that family dinner, I realized that my parents were planning to steal my inheritance while justifying their theft as parental protection and responsible financial management. The magnitude of their betrayal was devastating, but it also motivated me to take steps to protect my rights and ensure that Harrison's legacy would be honored despite their attempts to circumvent his wishes and family tradition. What Gerald and Dorothy didn't know was that their evasive responses and controlling behavior had already prompted me to begin investigating the true status of my dowry fund through independent financial analysis and legal consultation that would expose their theft and ensure that they faced appropriate consequences for their betrayal of both family trust and fiduciary responsibility. The decision to secretly investigate my dowry fund's true status was both emotionally difficult and practically necessary, as I struggled with the realization that I couldn't trust my own parents to honor their legal and moral obligations regarding my inheritance. The investigation would require careful discretion to avoid alerting Gerald and Dorothy to my suspicions, while gathering enough evidence to understand what they had actually done with the money Harrison had intended for my wedding day. My first step was contacting Harrison's original estate attorney, Margaret Whitfield, who had drafted the legal documents establishing the dowry fund, and who understood the specific terms and conditions that governed its management and distribution. Margaret had been my grandfather's trusted advisor for over 30 years, and she had intimate knowledge of his intentions and the legal protections he had built into the dowry arrangement. "Evelyn, I'm so glad you called," Margaret said when I reached out to discuss my concerns about my parents' management of the dowry fund. "I've been wondering about the status of your inheritance as your wedding approaches. Your grandfather was very specific about the timing and conditions for the dowry presentation, and I want to make sure his wishes are being honored appropriately." The conversation with Margaret revealed that Harrison's original legal documentation contained much more specific and binding requirements than I had previously understood, including detailed provisions designed to prevent exactly the kind of parental interference and control that Gerald and Dorothy were attempting to exercise over my inheritance. "Your grandfather's will contains explicit language requiring the dowry fund to be transferred to your personal control on your wedding day," Margaret explained. "There are no provisions for parental discretion or conditional distribution based on assessments of your financial maturity or decision-making capabilities. The money is yours by legal right, not by parental permission." The legal clarity was both reassuring and alarming. Reassuring because it confirmed that I had legitimate rights to my inheritance that couldn't be overridden by parental opinion, but alarming because it suggested that Gerald and Dorothy were planning to violate explicit legal requirements rather than just disregarding family tradition or personal preferences. Margaret's next revelation was even more concerning, as she explained that Harrison had included specific penalties and enforcement mechanisms in the legal documentation to ensure that trustees who mismanaged or misappropriated dowry funds would face serious legal and financial consequences. "Your grandfather was very concerned about the possibility of family members trying to circumvent or control the dowry distributions," Margaret continued. "So he included language that makes trustees personally liable for any misuse of funds, plus penalties and interest that could far exceed the original inheritance amount if legal action becomes necessary to enforce the dowry requirements. The penalty provisions were comprehensive and severe, designed to deter exactly the kind of behavior that Gerald and Dorothy were demonstrating, and to ensure that beneficiaries like me would have effective legal recourse if family members violated their fiduciary responsibilities. But Margaret's most important advice was that I should immediately hire an independent forensic accountant to examine the true status of the dowry fund before confronting my parents or taking any legal action that might prompt them to hide evidence or further misappropriate funds that were legally mine. "Evelyn, I recommend that you work with forensic accountant David Morrison, who specializes in family trust disputes and inheritance theft, Margaret said, providing me with contact information for a professional who had extensive experience investigating exactly the kind of financial mismanagement that I suspected my parents had committed. David can analyze the fund's actual status without alerting your parents to the investigation, and he can document any misappropriation or mismanagement that might have occurred during their stewardship. The forensic accounting investigation began immediately, with David Morrison using his legal authority to obtain independent financial records and investment documentation that would reveal the true status of my dowry fund without requiring cooperation or disclosure from Gerald and Dorothy. The preliminary results of David's investigation were even worse than I had feared, revealing not just mismanagement or poor investment performance, but systematic theft and misappropriation that had reduced my $850,000 inheritance to less than $200,000, while my parents used the stolen money to fund luxury purchases and lifestyle improvements for themselves. Evelyn, I need to prepare you for some very disturbing news about your dowry fund, David said during our meeting to review his initial findings. Your parents haven't just mismanaged the investments, they've systematically stolen the majority of your inheritance and used it for personal expenses that have nothing to do with growing or protecting your dowry. The forensic analysis revealed that Gerald and Dorothy had begun stealing from my dowry fund almost immediately after gaining control of its management, using sophisticated accounting manipulation and false documentation to hide their theft, while providing me with fabricated statements that showed continued growth and successful investment performance. They've taken approximately $650,000 from your dowry fund over the past 6 years, David continued, showing me evidence of wire transfers, investment liquidations, and account manipulations that documented the systematic theft of my inheritance. The money was used to fund a complete renovation of their home, the purchase of luxury vehicles, expensive vacations, and other personal expenses that had nothing to do with managing or growing your dowry. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, including bank records, contractor payments, travel expenses, and luxury purchases that totaled far more than Gerald and Dorothy could have afforded through their legitimate business income and personal savings. They had essentially been living off my stolen inheritance, while maintaining the pretense of responsible financial stewardship and successful investment management. But the most infuriating discovery was that they had planned the theft from the beginning, apparently viewing my dowry fund as their personal resource rather than as my inheritance that they were legally obligated to preserve and protect for my wedding day. The pattern of withdrawals and fund transfers shows that this wasn't impulsive or accidental mismanagement, David explained. This was calculated theft that began almost immediately after they gained control of the fund and continued systematically for 6 years while they provided you with false statements showing fictional investment growth. Have you ever discovered that people you loved and trusted had been systematically stealing from you for years while looking you in the eye and lying about their responsible stewardship of your most important financial asset? That's exactly what I experienced as David's investigation revealed the full extent of my parents' betrayal and theft of Harrison's legacy. The forensic evidence was so clear and comprehensive that David was confident we could not only recover the stolen funds, but also seek significant additional damages and penalties based on the fiduciary violations and breach of trust that Gerald and Dorothy had committed over 6 years of systematic theft. Your grandfather's legal documentation includes provisions for treble damages and attorney fees in cases of trustee misconduct, David explained, which means your parents could be liable for returning not just the $650,000 they stole, but potentially over $2 million in damages and penalties, plus all legal costs associated with recovering your inheritance. The potential legal consequences were severe and appropriate, reflecting the magnitude of their theft and the sophisticated deception they had maintained while stealing my inheritance and violating Harrison's explicit wishes about my dowry presentation. As my wedding day approached and Gerald and Dorothy continued their pretense of responsible fund management, I completed the legal preparations that would expose their theft and ensure they faced appropriate consequences for their betrayal of family trust and fiduciary responsibility. But I had no idea that their plan to publicly humiliate me at my own wedding reception would make their theft even more outrageous and legally actionable than the systematic financial fraud they had already committed against Harrison's legacy and my financial future. The planning and preparation for my wedding to Marcus had been a joyous and exciting process that represented not just our commitment to each other, but also the beginning of our shared life together as equal partners in building whatever dreams and goals we chose to pursue. The ceremony was scheduled to take place at the Grand Ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan, with a guest list of 200 people including family members, close friends, professional colleagues, and business associates who had been important parts of our individual lives and who we wanted to share in celebrating our marriage. Marcus and I had spent months planning every detail of the wedding celebration, from the elegant floral arrangements and sophisticated menu, to the live jazz ensemble, and the photographer whose artistic vision would capture the memories we would treasure for the rest of our lives together. The planning process had been collaborative and fun, reflecting our shared values and aesthetic preferences while honoring both of our family traditions and cultural backgrounds. "This is going to be the perfect wedding," Marcus had said as we finalized the details with our wedding planner. "Elegant but not ostentatious, meaningful but not overly sentimental, and focused on celebrating our commitment to each other rather than impressing people with expensive displays or elaborate productions." The approach we had chosen reflected our personalities and values, creating a celebration that would be memorable and beautiful while maintaining the kind of understated sophistication that both of our families appreciated and that matched our professional status and social circle. The traditional dowry presentation was scheduled to occur during the reception's gift ceremony, when family members and close friends would offer toasts and present special gifts that marked the significance of the occasion and welcomed us into married life with their support and blessings. According to Barnes family tradition, the dowry presentation was always one of the most meaningful moments of the wedding celebration, representing not just financial support, but also the family's confidence in the bride's judgment and their blessing for her future happiness and success. "I'm so excited about presenting your dowry," Dorothy had said during one of our final wedding planning meetings, her voice filled with apparent enthusiasm and pride about participating in the family tradition that Harrison had established. "It's going to be such a special moment, and I know your grandfather would be so proud to see his legacy being honored at your beautiful wedding." Gerald had been equally enthusiastic about the dowry presentation, describing it as one of the highlights of the wedding celebration, and assuring me that he had prepared special remarks that would honor Harrison's memory while celebrating my marriage and future with Marcus. "Evelyn, the dowry presentation is going to be unforgettable," Gerald had said, apparently unaware of how prophetic his words would prove to be, though not in the way he intended. "I've been preparing what I want to say about your grandfather's legacy and your future, and I think it's going to be one of the most meaningful moments of the entire wedding celebration." Their apparent enthusiasm and detailed preparation for the dowry presentation had seemed genuine and touching, providing no indication of the devastating humiliation and theft they were planning to execute in front of all our wedding guests at what should have been the happiest moment of my life. The wedding ceremony itself was everything Marcus and I had hoped it would be: elegant, meaningful, and filled with the love and support of family and friends who had gathered to witness our commitment to each other and to celebrate the beginning of our married life together. The vows we exchanged were personal and heartfelt, reflecting our individual personalities and our shared vision for the kind of partnership we wanted to build through love, respect, and mutual support of each other's dreams and aspirations. "I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word," Marcus had said during his vows, "supporting your ambitions, sharing your burdens, celebrating your successes, and building a life together that honors both of our individual strengths and our collective dreams for the future." My own vows had focused on the qualities that had attracted me to Marcus and the kind of marriage I wanted us to create together. "I promise to love you, not just in the easy moments, but especially during the challenges that will test our commitment and partnership. I promise to maintain my own identity and independence while building something together that is stronger and more meaningful than anything either of us could achieve alone." The ceremony was witnessed by 200 guests who filled the elegant ballroom with love, laughter, and tears of joy as we exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife by the officiant who had known both of our families for years and who had helped us craft a ceremony that reflected our values and our vision for married life. The reception that followed was equally beautiful and celebratory, with cocktails, dinner, dancing, and the traditional gift presentations that allowed our family members and closest friends to share their love and support, while offering toasts and special gifts that marked the significance of the occasion. The atmosphere was joyful and festive, with guests mingling, dancing, and celebrating in the elegant ballroom setting that Marcus and I had chosen specifically because it provided the kind of sophisticated backdrop that would make our wedding memorable without being overly elaborate or ostentatious. But as the evening progressed toward the traditional gift ceremony, I began to notice subtle signs of tension and nervousness from Gerald and Dorothy that should have warned me about the devastating surprise they were preparing to deliver in front of all our wedding guests. Dorothy kept checking her watch and exchanging meaningful glances with Gerald, while both of them seemed unusually anxious and distracted during conversations with other family members and wedding guests. Their behavior was different from the relaxed celebration I would have expected from parents who were genuinely happy about their daughter's wedding and excited about participating in the traditional dowry presentation. "Mom, are you okay?" I had asked Dorothy during a quiet moment when I noticed her distracted demeanor and apparent nervousness about something that was clearly weighing on her mind. "Oh, I'm fine, darling," Dorothy had replied with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just thinking about the dowry presentation and making sure everything goes perfectly. It's such an important family tradition, and I want to make sure we honor your grandfather's memory appropriately." Her response had seemed reasonable at the time, though I would later realize that her nervousness was actually anticipation about the public humiliation she and Gerald were planning to inflict on me during what should have been one of the most joyful moments of my wedding celebration. As the gift ceremony began, family members and close friends took turns offering toasts and presenting special gifts that represented their love and support for our marriage. Marcus's parents presented us with a beautiful set of crystal stemware that had been in their family for generations, while my aunts and uncles offered heartfelt toasts and meaningful gifts that celebrated our commitment to each other and welcomed Marcus into the Barnes family. The presentations were touching and meaningful, creating exactly the kind of warm, supportive atmosphere that Marcus and I had hoped to achieve for our wedding celebration. Our guests were clearly enjoying the ceremony, and the elegant ballroom setting provided the perfect backdrop for the traditional gift presentations that mark the significance of our marriage and the beginning of our shared life together. But as Gerald approached the microphone to begin what everyone expected would be the traditional dowry presentation that had been honored for generations of Barnes family weddings, the atmosphere in the ballroom was about to shift from celebration to shocked silence as my parents prepared to deliver the most devastating betrayal and public humiliation I had ever experienced. Have you ever stood in front of everyone you care about, expecting to receive a meaningful family blessing, only to be publicly humiliated and betrayed by the people who were supposed to love and support you most? That's exactly what I was about to experience as Gerald took the microphone and prepared to destroy not just my wedding celebration, but also my trust in family loyalty and parental love. The moment when Gerald took the microphone during the gift ceremony will be burned into my memory forever, not as a joyful family tradition, but as the moment when my parents chose to publicly humiliate and betray me in front of everyone who mattered most in my personal and professional life. The ballroom fell silent as our 200 wedding guests turned their attention to what they expected would be the traditional presentation of my dowry, a meaningful family ceremony that represented generations of Barnes family love and support for their daughters' marriages and future happiness. "Ladies and gentlemen," Gerald began, his voice carrying clearly throughout the elegant ballroom, where our family, friends, colleagues, and business associates had gathered to celebrate what should have been the happiest day of my life. "I want to talk about the Barnes family tradition of presenting a dowry to our daughters on their wedding day, and about some important decisions that Dorothy and I have made regarding Evelyn's inheritance and financial future." The formal tone and mention of important decisions should have been an immediate warning that something was wrong, but I was still expecting the traditional presentation, and had no reason to anticipate the devastating betrayal that was about to unfold in front of everyone I cared about most. Marcus sensed the shift in Gerald's tone, and reached for my hand, offering silent support, as we both listened to what we assumed would be a meaningful speech about family tradition and Grandfather Harrison's legacy, followed by the presentation of the dowry that would help us start our married life with financial security and independence. "As many of you know," Gerald continued, "Evelyn's grandfather Harrison established a substantial dowry fund that has grown over the years and was intended to be presented today as our wedding gift to the happy couple. However, after careful consideration and extensive discussion, Dorothy and I have decided that we need to modify this tradition based on our assessment of what would be best for Evelyn's long-term financial security and responsible money management. The phrase "modify this tradition" sent a chill through me as I began to realize that Gerald wasn't building toward a traditional dowry presentation, but toward some kind of announcement that would change or eliminate the inheritance that Harrison had specifically intended for my wedding day. Dorothy stood up from her seat at the family table, clearly prepared to join Gerald in whatever announcement they had planned, her face wearing an expression of determined righteousness that suggested she believed they were making a difficult but necessary decision for my own good. After watching Evelyn and Marcus during their engagement, Gerald continued, his voice becoming more condescending with each word, we've observed some concerning patterns in their financial decision-making and spending habits that make us worry about their ability to handle a large sum of money responsibly immediately after their wedding. The public criticism of our financial management was both insulting and completely inaccurate, since both Marcus and I had demonstrated consistent financial responsibility throughout our adult lives and had specifically discussed our plans for managing the dowry money with careful consideration and professional financial planning. But Gerald wasn't finished with his devastating critique of our supposed financial immaturity and irresponsibility, apparently determined to justify whatever decision he and Dorothy had made about my inheritance by publicly questioning our judgment and capability in front of all our wedding guests. Dorothy and I have seen examples of impulsive purchases, inadequate budgeting, and financial decisions that suggest Evelyn and Marcus might not be ready to handle the responsibility that comes with a substantial inheritance, like the dowry fund that Harrison established for this occasion. The specific accusations were vague and fabricated, since neither Gerald nor Dorothy had any legitimate evidence of irresponsible financial behavior from either Marcus or me. They were creating false justifications for whatever theft or betrayal they were about to announce, apparently believing that public criticism would make their actions seem reasonable, rather than recognizing how inappropriate and hurtful their behavior was becoming. Marcus squeezed my hand more tightly as Gerald's speech continued, clearly understanding that something terrible was happening, but still not anticipating the full magnitude of the betrayal that was about to be revealed to our wedding guests. Therefore, Gerald announced, his voice becoming more confident as he approached the climax of his devastating speech, Dorothy and I have decided to keep Evelyn's dowry fund under our management for safekeeping until she and Marcus can demonstrate more mature and responsible financial decision-making over the next several years. The silence that followed Gerald's announcement was unlike anything I had ever experienced, as 200 wedding guests processed what they had just heard and tried to understand how parents could publicly humiliate their daughter by withholding her inheritance on her wedding day while criticizing her financial maturity in front of everyone she cared about. Dorothy quickly joined Gerald at the microphone, clearly prepared to reinforce their decision with additional justifications that would make their theft of my inheritance seem like loving parental protection rather than the devastating betrayal it actually represented. We want everyone to understand that we're doing this out of love and concern for Evelyn's future, Dorothy said, her voice filled with the self-righteous tone she used whenever she wanted to justify controversial decisions by claiming they were motivated by superior wisdom and parental responsibility. Young couples often make foolish financial decisions in the excitement of early marriage, and we don't want Evelyn and Marcus to jeopardize their financial security by making impulsive choices with money that should be preserved for their long-term stability and success. The condescending explanation made their theft of my inheritance sound like a generous intervention designed to protect me from my own poor judgment, completely ignoring the fact that they were violating explicit legal requirements and family traditions while publicly humiliating me on what should have been the happiest day of my life. When Evelyn and Marcus prove that they can handle smaller financial responsibilities maturely and demonstrate consistent good judgment with money management, Gerald added, then we'll reconsider presenting the dowry fund to them. Maybe in a few years, when they've shown us that they're ready for this kind of financial responsibility. Have you ever been publicly humiliated by people who claimed to love you while they stole something precious that was legally yours and justified their theft as protection from your own supposed inadequacy? That's exactly what I experienced, as Gerald and Dorothy transformed my wedding reception into a platform for announcing their theft of my inheritance, while criticizing my financial maturity in front of everyone who mattered most in my personal and professional life. The reaction from our wedding guests was immediate and devastating, as whispers rippled through the ballroom and people exchanged shocked glances while trying to process what they had just witnessed. My new mother-in-law audibly gasped, covering her mouth in horror as she realized that her son's wedding celebration was being destroyed by his new in-laws' unprecedented and inappropriate behavior. Several of my professional colleagues, including senior executives from my company who had attended the wedding as valued associates and friends, were clearly uncomfortable and embarrassed by what they were witnessing, exchanging meaningful looks that suggested they were questioning the family dynamics and values that could produce such public humiliation and financial manipulation. Marcus and I stood frozen in horror and disbelief, holding hands tightly while trying to maintain some dignity and composure, despite the devastating betrayal that was unfolding in front of everyone we had invited to celebrate our marriage and share in what should have been the happiest moment of our lives together. The humiliation was so complete and unexpected that I initially couldn't find words to respond or any way to salvage the celebration that had been transformed from a joyful wedding reception into a painful public spectacle that would be remembered by every guest as the moment when my parents chose theft and control over love and family tradition. "Evelyn, dear," one of my aunts approached me with tears in her eyes, clearly moved by the public humiliation she had just witnessed. "Are you going to be okay? Do you and Marcus need any financial help to get started? This isn't right, and it isn't what Harrison would have wanted." The offers of assistance from family members and friends who recognized the inappropriate nature of Gerald and Dorothy's behavior were touching, but also intensified the humiliation by making it clear that everyone understood I was being victimized by my own parents' theft and manipulation. Other guests approached with similar expressions of sympathy and confusion, trying to offer support while clearly struggling to understand how parents could treat their daughter so cruelly on her wedding day and violate family traditions that had been honored for generations of Barnes family marriages. "I can't believe they would do this to you at your own wedding," whispered one of my closest friends. "This is supposed to be your special day, and they've turned it into some kind of lesson about financial responsibility. It's completely inappropriate and hurtful." The evening that should have ended with dancing, celebration, and joy was instead concluded with Marcus and me trying to graciously thank guests for attending, while privately processing the magnitude of our family's betrayal and the devastating impact it had on what should have been the perfect beginning to our married life together. As we left the reception venue that night, I was no longer just a new bride celebrating her marriage. I was also the victim of a sophisticated theft and public humiliation that would require legal action and family confrontation to resolve. Gerald and Dorothy had not only stolen my inheritance, but had also attempted to justify their theft by publicly questioning my maturity and judgment in front of everyone who mattered most in my personal and professional life. But what they didn't understand was that their public betrayal had been witnessed by 200 people who would serve as additional motivation for me to pursue every available legal remedy to recover my stolen inheritance and ensure that they faced appropriate consequences for their violation of family trust, legal obligations, and basic human decency. The days following our wedding were a surreal combination of honeymoon planning, thank you note writing, and legal preparation as Marcus and I tried to process the emotional impact of my parents' betrayal while taking practical steps to recover my stolen inheritance and hold Gerald and Dorothy accountable for their systematic theft and public humiliation. The honeymoon we had planned to Paris felt both necessary as an escape from the family drama and inappropriate as a celebration when we were dealing with such a devastating betrayal and financial crisis. Marcus suggested we postpone the trip until the legal situation was resolved, but I insisted that we proceed with our original plans rather than allowing my parents' theft to destroy even more of our wedding celebration and early marriage memories. "We're not going to let their betrayal ruin our entire wedding experience," I told Marcus as we finalized our travel plans. "They've already stolen my inheritance and humiliated us in front of all our friends and family. We're not going to give them the power to steal our honeymoon too." The decision to proceed with our Paris honeymoon while simultaneously pursuing legal action against my parents was both emotionally complex and practically challenging, as I spent our romantic getaway researching international wire transfer procedures and coordinating with attorneys and forensic accountants through encrypted communications that protected our legal strategy from any potential interference. But the most important development during our honeymoon was receiving confirmation from forensic accountant David Morrison that he had completed his comprehensive analysis of my dowry fund's true status and had documented evidence of theft and misappropriation that far exceeded even our worst expectations about Gerald and Dorothy's systematic fraud. Evelyn, I need to update you on some additional discoveries that make your parents' theft even more extensive and legally actionable than we initially realized, David said during a secure phone call to our Paris hotel. They didn't just steal the $650,000 we previously identified. They've actually misappropriated over $750,000 from your dowry fund while providing you with completely fabricated statements showing fictional investment growth. The additional theft was devastating but not entirely surprising, given the sophisticated deception they had maintained for 6 years and their apparent confidence that their fraud would never be discovered or legally challenged. They used an additional $150,000 of your inheritance to purchase luxury vehicles, jewelry, and high-end electronics that they claimed were business expenses or investment purchases, David continued. But the forensic analysis shows that all of these expenditures were personal consumption, funded entirely by your stolen dowry money. The evidence was comprehensive and damning, including purchase records, bank transfers, and financial documentation that clearly showed Gerald and Dorothy had been living a luxury lifestyle, funded entirely by systematic theft of my inheritance, while maintaining the pretense of responsible fund management and successful investment returns. But David's most important discovery was that their theft wasn't just morally outrageous and financially devastating. It was also a clear violation of federal laws governing trust fund management and fiduciary responsibility that would result in serious criminal charges and civil penalties far beyond simple restitution of the stolen funds. Your parents have committed federal crimes including wire fraud, mail fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of trust fund regulations, David explained. The penalties for these crimes include not only complete restitution of stolen funds, but also punitive damages, interest, attorney fees, and potential criminal prosecution that could result in significant prison sentences. The legal consequences were severe and appropriate, reflecting the magnitude of their systematic theft and the sophisticated deception they had maintained while violating both legal obligations and family trust over multiple years of fraudulent fund management. I'm recommending that we coordinate with both civil attorneys and federal prosecutors to ensure your parents face the full range of legal consequences for their crimes, David continued. They need to understand that stealing family inheritances and violating fiduciary responsibilities has serious legal and financial consequences that will affect them for the rest of their lives. As Marcus and I spent our honeymoon touring Paris museums and enjoying romantic dinners, while simultaneously coordinating a complex legal strategy to recover my stolen inheritance, I realized that my parents' betrayal had transformed me from a naive daughter who trusted family members into a determined adult who was prepared to use every available legal remedy to ensure that theft and betrayal had appropriate consequences. The juxtaposition of honeymoon romance and legal warfare preparation was surreal, but also empowering, as I discovered that I had the strength and resources necessary to fight back against even sophisticated family fraud, and to demand accountability from people who had thought they could steal from me with impunity. When Marcus and I returned from Paris, we immediately implemented the comprehensive legal strategy that had been developed during our honeymoon communications with attorneys and forensic accountants. The strategy was designed to maximize both the financial recovery and the legal consequences that Gerald and Dorothy would face for their systematic theft and public humiliation of their own daughter. We're going to file simultaneous civil and criminal complaints, Attorney Margaret Whitfield explained during our first post-honeymoon strategy meeting. The civil action will focus on recovering your stolen inheritance plus damages and penalties, while the criminal referral will ensure that your parents face appropriate prosecution for the federal crimes they committed through their systematic theft and fraud. The timing of the legal action was carefully planned to maximize its impact and effectiveness, with service of process scheduled to occur during Gerald and Dorothy's upcoming 30th wedding anniversary party, where they would be celebrating their marriage in front of the same extended family and social circle who had witnessed their theft and humiliation of me at my wedding reception. Serving the legal papers at their anniversary party will ensure that their theft is exposed to the same social circle that witnessed their public humiliation of you, Margaret explained. It will also demonstrate that their crimes have serious legal consequences that can't be hidden or minimized through social manipulation or claims of parental authority. The anniversary party service was both strategic and symbolic, showing Gerald and Dorothy that their systematic theft would be met with equally public legal consequences, and that their social standing and reputation would be affected by their criminal behavior, just as mine had been affected by their public humiliation at my wedding. Have you ever planned a confrontation that would expose someone's crimes to the same audience that witnessed their previous betrayal of you? That's exactly what I was preparing as we finalized the legal strategy that would ensure Gerald and Dorothy faced comprehensive consequences for their theft, fraud, and public humiliation at the most socially visible moment possible. The legal documents were extensive and devastating, including detailed evidence of their systematic theft, forensic accounting analysis of their fraud, and comprehensive damages calculations that showed they owed not just restitution, but also punitive damages and penalties that would far exceed the original inheritance amount. But the most important aspect of the legal strategy was that it would finally expose the truth about their financial crimes to family members and social contacts who had been deceived by their claims of responsible fund management and their justifications for withholding my inheritance based on concerns about my supposed financial immaturity. As the date of their anniversary party approached, I felt a combination of nervous anticipation and determined satisfaction about the justice that was finally going to be served for their betrayal, theft, and systematic violation of both legal obligations and family trust. The 30th wedding anniversary party that Gerald and Dorothy had planned was intended to be a celebration of their marriage and their success as a couple, with 150 guests including extended family members, business associates, and social contacts who had been part of their lives throughout their decades together. The party was being held at the same country club, where they had hosted numerous social events over the years, and they had clearly intended it to be a glamorous celebration that would reinforce their social status and demonstrate their continued success and happiness. The guest list included many of the same family members and friends who had attended my wedding reception and witnessed their public humiliation of me during the dowry announcement, which made their anniversary party the perfect venue for exposing the truth about their theft and ensuring that they faced social consequences that matched the social humiliation they had inflicted on me. We've coordinated with the country club management and local law enforcement to ensure that the service of process occurs smoothly without disrupting other club activities or creating unnecessary complications for guests who aren't involved in the legal dispute, Margaret Whitfield explained as we finalized the timing and logistics of the anniversary party service. The planning was professional and discreet, designed to ensure that Gerald and Dorothy received their legal papers in a way that was public enough to expose their crimes to their social circle, but controlled enough to avoid creating chaos or endangering other people who were simply attending a family celebration. As the anniversary party began, Gerald and Dorothy were clearly enjoying their role as the celebrated couple, accepting congratulations and toasts from family members and friends who had gathered to honor their 30 years of marriage and their apparent success in building a life together based on love, mutual support, and shared values. 30 years of marriage is a remarkable achievement, Gerald said during his toast to the assembled guests. Dorothy and I have built a beautiful life together based on trust, communication, and our shared commitment to family values and responsible decision-making. We're grateful for all the friends and family who have supported us throughout our journey together. The irony of Gerald praising trust and responsible decision-making, while he and Dorothy had systematically stolen from their own daughter and violated their fiduciary responsibilities, was both painful and motivating as I prepared to watch them face the legal consequences they had earned through their criminal behavior. Dorothy's toast was equally hypocritical, as she thanked their guests for celebrating the values and principles that have guided our family throughout our marriage, while having spent years committing sophisticated fraud against the family member who had trusted them most completely. We've always believed that family comes first, and that parents have a responsibility to guide their children toward responsible and mature decision-making, Dorothy said, apparently still believing that their theft of my inheritance could be justified as parental wisdom rather than criminal fraud. We're proud of the family we've built and the values we've instilled in our daughter, even when that required making difficult decisions that weren't immediately popular or appreciated. The subtle reference to their theft and public humiliation of me as difficult decisions that demonstrated their superior parental wisdom was both insulting and revealing about their continued lack of understanding about the criminal nature of their behavior and the serious legal consequences they were about to face. But as Gerald and Dorothy basked in the congratulations and admiration of their anniversary party guests, professional process servers were arriving at the country club with legal documents that would transform their celebration into the most humiliating and legally consequential moment of their lives. The service occurred at exactly 8:30 p.m., during the peak of the anniversary celebration, when the maximum number of guests were present to witness Gerald and Dorothy's exposure as criminals who had built their apparent success through systematic theft and fraud against their own daughter. "Gerald and Dorothy Barnes," announced process server Jennifer Martinez as she approached their table with legal documents and law enforcement backup. "You are being served with civil complaints for theft, fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of trust fund regulations, as well as criminal referrals to federal prosecutors for wire fraud, mail fraud, and systematic theft of inheritance funds." No, the silence that followed the service announcement was even more dramatic than the silence that had greeted their theft announcement at my wedding reception, as their anniversary party guests realized they were witnessing the exposure of serious criminal behavior, rather than celebrating a successful marriage and family life. "These legal documents detail evidence of your systematic theft of over $750,000 from your daughter's inheritance fund, including forensic accounting analysis of your fraud and comprehensive damages calculations, showing your liability for restitution, penalties, and punitive damages totaling over $2.5 million. The process server continued, handing Gerald and Dorothy the legal papers that would destroy their financial security and social reputation. The guest reactions were immediate and devastating, with family members and friends expressing shock and disgust as they realized that Gerald and Dorothy's apparent wealth and luxury lifestyle had been funded through criminal theft from their own daughter's inheritance rather than through legitimate business success and responsible financial management. "I can't believe you would steal from Evelyn," said Dorothy's sister Margaret, her voice filled with horror and disappointment as she processed the magnitude of the betrayal that had just been exposed. "No wonder you could afford all those expensive renovations and luxury purchases. You were spending her inheritance money while lying to her about fund management and investment returns." Other guests began connecting the dots between Gerald and Dorothy's unexplained wealth improvements and their systematic theft of my dowry fund, realizing that they had been witnessing and celebrating the proceeds of criminal fraud rather than legitimate family success and financial achievement. "This explains why you were so evasive about Evelyn's dowry at the wedding," said one family friend who had attended both events. "You had already stolen the money and were trying to justify your theft by claiming she wasn't mature enough to handle her own inheritance. The whole time you were the ones who were stealing and lying." The social exposure was comprehensive and devastating, as Gerald and Dorothy's reputation and social standing collapsed in front of the same people who had witnessed their public humiliation of me at my wedding reception just months earlier. As law enforcement officers arrived to provide security during the service of process and to begin preliminary investigation of the criminal charges, Gerald and Dorothy's anniversary celebration transformed into a humiliating exposure of their crimes that would affect their social relationships and community standing for years to come. The process server's final statement ensured that every guest understood the magnitude of the legal consequences that Gerald and Dorothy were now facing. All assets purchased with stolen inheritance funds have been frozen pending civil litigation, and federal prosecutors will be reviewing criminal charges that carry potential prison sentences of 15 to 20 years plus complete financial restitution. Have you ever watched people who betrayed and humiliated you face immediate and comprehensive legal consequences in front of the same audience that witnessed their original crimes against you? That's exactly what I experienced, as Gerald and Dorothy's anniversary party became the moment when their theft and fraud were exposed to their entire social circle, while they faced the beginning of legal proceedings that would destroy their financial security and social reputation permanently. The anniversary party that was supposed to celebrate their marriage and success had instead become the public revelation of their criminal behavior and the beginning of legal consequences that would affect them for the rest of their lives. while I finally received the justice and vindication that their systematic theft and public humiliation had demanded. The legal proceedings that followed Gerald and Dorothy's public exposure at their anniversary party moved with remarkable speed and efficiency, as federal prosecutors and civil attorneys worked together to ensure that their systematic theft and fraud resulted in comprehensive consequences that matched the magnitude of their crimes against family trust and legal obligations. The evidence that forensic accountant David Morrison had compiled was so thorough and damning that both criminal and civil cases proceeded without significant delays or procedural complications. Your parents have agreed to plead guilty to federal charges of wire fraud, mail fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty in exchange for cooperation with asset recovery, and a recommended sentence of 8-10 years in federal prison. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Roberts informed me during a meeting about the criminal case resolution. They've also agreed to complete restitution of stolen funds, plus punitive damages and attorney fees totaling $2.8 million. The plea agreement was comprehensive and appropriate, ensuring that Gerald and Dorothy would face serious prison sentences while also providing maximum financial recovery that far exceeded the original inheritance amount they had stolen from my dowry fund. The asset forfeiture orders have frozen all property purchased with your stolen inheritance money, Attorney Roberts continued, including their renovated home, luxury vehicles, jewelry, and other assets that were acquired through systematic theft of your dowry fund. These assets will be liquidated to fund the restitution payments you're entitled to receive. The asset recovery was swift and comprehensive, with federal marshals seizing Gerald and Dorothy's home, cars, and luxury possessions while freezing their bank accounts and investment portfolios to ensure that every dollar of their apparent wealth was available for restitution and damages payments. But beyond the financial recovery and criminal consequences, the most satisfying aspect of the legal resolution was the complete vindication of my character and financial judgment that their theft and public humiliation had attempted to destroy at my wedding reception. The forensic analysis clearly shows that you and Marcus have demonstrated exemplary financial responsibility throughout your adult lives, David Morrison explained in his final report. Your parents' claims about your supposed financial immaturity and irresponsible spending were completely fabricated to justify their theft and create false moral authority for their criminal behavior. The professional vindication was important not just for my personal sense of justice, but also for my professional reputation. Since Gerald and Dorothy's public criticism of my financial judgment at my wedding reception had been witnessed by colleagues and business associates whose respect and confidence were crucial for my career advancement and professional relationships. The social consequences for Gerald and Dorothy were equally comprehensive and permanent, as their exposure as criminals who had stolen from their own daughter's inheritance resulted in complete ostracism from the social circle and business community that had previously respected them as successful professionals and responsible family leaders. No one in our social circle wants anything to do with them anymore, reported my Aunt Margaret, who had maintained connections with the family friends and business associates who had witnessed their criminal exposure at the anniversary party. People are disgusted that they would steal from their own daughter and then try to justify their theft by publicly humiliating her at her wedding. Everyone realizes now that their apparent wealth was built on criminal fraud rather than legitimate success. The destruction of their social relationships and community standing was appropriate consequences for people who had chosen to build their lifestyle through theft, while publicly attacking the character and judgment of the person they were stealing from. Meanwhile, Marcus and I were finally able to use the recovered dowry funds for the purposes that Harrison had originally intended when he established the inheritance tradition, purchasing a beautiful home in Manhattan's Upper East Side and establishing investment accounts that would provide long-term financial security and independence for our married life together. "This house is exactly what your grandfather envisioned when he established the dowry tradition," Marcus said, as we toured our new home, which had been purchased entirely with the recovered inheritance funds, plus additional money from the damages and penalties that Gerald and Dorothy were required to pay. He wanted you to have the financial freedom to make choices based on love and dreams rather than economic necessity. And that's exactly what this inheritance has provided. The home we purchased was both a practical investment and a symbolic victory, representing the successful recovery of Harrison's legacy and the restoration of the family tradition that Gerald and Dorothy had attempted to destroy through their theft and public humiliation. But perhaps the most meaningful outcome of the entire ordeal was the way it had strengthened my marriage to Marcus, and demonstrated that our partnership was built on genuine love and mutual support, rather than financial considerations or family pressures that might have complicated our relationship during the legal battles and family conflicts. "I'm proud of how you handled this entire situation," Marcus told me, as we settled into our new home, and reflected on the year that had transformed us from newlyweds dealing with family betrayal into a strong partnership that had successfully recovered from theft and public humiliation. "You could have let their betrayal destroy your confidence and our happiness, but instead you fought back with intelligence and determination that proved their assessment of your character was completely wrong." The experience had indeed been transformative, teaching me that family relationships based on theft and manipulation were less valuable than the integrity and independence that came from demanding accountability and justice when people violated trust and legal obligations. 6 months after Gerald and Dorothy's criminal conviction and civil judgment, they were serving their federal prison sentences, while their former assets continued to be liquidated to fund the ongoing restitution payments that would continue for years after their release from incarceration. "Your parents will spend the next decade paying back the money they stole from you, plus interest and penalties that ensure you receive far more than the original inheritance amount your grandfather intended," Margaret Whitfield explained during our final legal consultation. "They've also been required to write formal apologies, acknowledging their theft, and admitting that their public criticism of your financial judgment was completely fabricated to justify their criminal behavior." The formal apologies were meaningful not just as personal vindication, but also as legal documentation that could be shared with anyone who had witnessed their public humiliation of me at my wedding reception, ensuring that my professional reputation and personal character were fully restored from their false accusations and manipulative justifications. As I reflected on the journey from devastating wedding betrayal to comprehensive legal victory, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about money or family relationships, but about the importance of maintaining integrity and demanding accountability, even when the people who betray you are family members who claim their actions are motivated by love and protection. Gerald and Dorothy's theft of my inheritance had been devastating, and their public humiliation had been cruel, but their actions had also revealed their true character, and had ultimately resulted in consequences that were far more severe than if they had simply honored their legal obligations and family traditions from the beginning. The dowry that Harrison had established to provide financial freedom and independence had ultimately served its intended purpose. Though the path to that freedom had required legal battles and family confrontations that he never could have anticipated when he created the tradition of supporting his granddaughters' marriages and futures. If you're reading this and you're dealing with family members who have stolen from your inheritance or violated trust fund obligations while claiming their actions are motivated by love and protection, please know that you have legal rights and resources that can help you recover your stolen assets while ensuring that thieves face appropriate consequences for their crimes. Family theft is particularly devastating because it combines financial fraud with emotional betrayal, but it's also particularly prosecutable because family members often leave extensive evidence trails and have confidence in their ability to manipulate legal systems and family relationships that makes them careless about concealing their crimes. Trust fund theft and inheritance fraud are serious federal crimes that carry significant penalties, including prison sentences, complete restitution, and additional damages that can far exceed the original stolen amounts, especially when family members have used their positions of trust to commit systematic fraud over multiple years. Setting boundaries with family members who steal from you isn't cruel. It's necessary for protecting your financial security and ensuring that people who commit crimes face appropriate consequences that might prevent them from victimizing others in the future. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members who have betrayed your trust is to ensure they face accountability for their actions, teaching them that theft and fraud have serious consequences, regardless of family relationships or claimed motivations of protection and superior wisdom. If this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share your experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had family members steal from your inheritance or trust funds while claiming they were protecting you from your own poor judgment? How did you handle situations where relatives used their positions of trust to commit fraud, while publicly questioning your character and financial maturity? Your story might help someone else who's dealing with similar betrayal and needs to understand that they have legal options for recovering stolen assets and demanding accountability from family members who have violated their trust and legal obligations. Thank you for joining me on this journey. And remember that your inherited rights and family legacy are worth protecting through whatever legal means necessary, even when the criminals are people who claim to love you and have your best interests at heart. See you in our next story here on Her Sweet Revenge.